Potential Not Pathology, embracing creative and resourceful approaches to psychotherapy with author and therapist Dr. Paul J. Leslie.
Welcome to Potential Not Pathology, where we offer information and inspiration for mental health therapists who are interested in learning and applying unique therapeutic techniques and concepts into their work. With a focus on the potential each client brings to his or her therapy session, this program examines ideas and tools which can assist your clients on their journey toward healing. I'm Paul J. Leslie. Thank you for being with me today. I have a special treat for you today. I get to do a nice interview with a wonderful gentleman named Stephen Brooks. Stephen Brooks is a British psychotherapist and hypnotherapist. He was one of the first to introduce Ericksonian hypnosis to Europe. Throughout his career, he has pioneered the use of indirect hypnosis in the medical profession. In 1979, Stephen registered the British Hypnosis Research Association, which was based at Cambridge University. Now, he was very successful in his teaching and his therapeutic work, and by the mid-1990s, his school was running training courses throughout Europe and abroad. As the management of the school became more demanding, Stephen decided that his original role as a therapist and trainer had evolved into that of a businessman, something he was not too keen on. So it's a really fascinating story. He decided to step back from his role in his organization and spend a good period of self-discovery, several years actually, in the jungles of northern Thailand. He pretty much gave away most everything he owned and moved to Thailand. Now, that's some dedication for you. Well, it's during this period that he became interested in the nature and causes of suffering. Drawing on these ideas and his previous experience and research, Stephen began developing a workable, practical psychotherapy process that could be implemented indirectly in contexts not normally associated with hypnosis or psychotherapy. Stephen calls this approach to therapy non-attachment therapy, which he feels directly treats the causes of problems and emphasizes compassion for patients. This is a blending of his Buddhist ideology with a tremendous and deep knowledge of Ericksonian and strategic approaches to psychotherapy. For more information on Stephen and his programs on psychotherapy, hypnosis, non-attachment therapy, go to StephenBrooksHypnosis.com. Stephen spoke to me from his home in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and we had just a wonderful conversation, and it's just such a pleasure to talk to somebody who's so passionate about helping others and the importance of compassion within the therapy. So I hope you enjoy this wonderful interview with Stephen Brooks. Stephen Brooks, welcome to Potential Not Pathology.
Hi there.
I am so happy for you to be with me today. I've been such a fan of your work over the years, and it's a delight for you to be on with me. So I would like to kind of start by asking you to just, as briefly as you feel comfortable, telling us how you got started with going into the field of therapy and hypnosis and, how that journey came about.
Well, I think it started when I was a school kid. Not that I was inspired specifically by anything at school. In fact, the reverse. I was looking for inspiration outside of school. So I was very curious what existed beyond a typical, high school curriculum. And so I would go into bookshops and just browse anything from the occult, as often teenagers do, right through to anything to do with therapy, personal development. Back then, of course, we're talking about the 1960s, personal development books were pretty scarce. It wasn't that popular at the time, and it was based mainly on published material from the 40s and 50s, very, very direct, like how to win friends and influence people type, books for personal development. And I found some books on hypnosis, and I was very curious about what was to be said and taught in these books. And they were terrible, to be honest. They were absolutely terrible books. I'm afraid they were all published by Americans. There was nothing in the UK at the time. They were all American publications, but they were really very direct and very poor quality and very repetitious. So they just mirrored each other in terms of content. And I thought, well, okay, I wasn't that impressed. And I thought, I couldn't imagine myself, getting out a pocket watch or staring into someone's eyes and going through a very kind of rigid, structured routine as a hypnotist. Maybe there was a fear then I might fail as well.
Right.
So I lived in Cambridge, which is University City, and very fortunate to be there because the architecture is very beautiful. So I used to walk around the colleges a lot. And then one particular day, I must have been about 13 or 14, I went through the gardens, and in the Porter's Lodge, which is the big gateway to each college, they have a notice board with lectures. And I just happened to look at this poster. It was a demonstration of hypnosis. And I thought, oh, how about this? So I went along to the lecture, sat up the back as a kind of large, kind of tiered auditorium. And I saw the professor there do some hypnotic hallucination work where he got one of the students at the front to actually hallucinate himself sitting somewhere else in the audience. And this was very impressive. And of course, it wasn't a theatrical context. So there was no kind of like, this can't be real. And this must be happening. This must be happening. It's a university. This has got to be the real thing. And then he did various other things with various members of the group. And I just sat at the back, and I shouldn't have been there, of course. I was just a kid, but people just ignored me. They probably thought I was the professor's son or something. And I watched this demonstration, and I was just like, wow, I want this. This is going to be my future. And so, and it became my future. The problem was there was a huge gap between then and when I started working as a therapist, simply because there was not the literature. There was nothing around in written form. And so there was a gap of several years, of course, because I was still at school. Then I went to university, and then I started working as a musician. I dropped out of university, and I signed up by a recording company, and I became a musician and songwriter. And so hypnosis put it up on the shelf for a while. And then, purely by chance, as I was not getting the income from being a professional musician and freelance recording person, I decided maybe I could do hypnotherapy as a career. So purely by chance, I was going into a public library, and I saw this book by Milton Erickson. And that was just absolutely so lucky.
Yes.
It was the only book that had been published at that time. The Practical Application of Medical and Dental Hypnosis. 3 authors, Sector, Hirschman, I think, and Erickson. And I just picked it up. And bear in mind, I already knew quite a bit about the direct form of hypnosis, which I'd actually just, passed over. And I picked this book up, and I just flicked through it. And there were some passages edited from lectures, and the initials MHE after these passages. And it was an amazing experience because these words just jumped off the page. Yeah. They were so in advance of anything I'd ever read. They were so in advance of what the other 2 authors were writing. Right. And so I went to the library and see, it was actually a reference library. You couldn't take the books out. And so I said, can I take this out? And they said, no, it's a reference library. And I thought, well, how am I going to read this? I can't come in every day. So I thought about this, and I went back, and between you and me and several other million people who are probably listening, I actually stole it. I stole this book. I've never taken it back. So that's how it started. There you go.
Wow.
And then later, inspired by that book and by deciding to opt out of the music business and actually work as a therapist, I went on a training course in the UK. It was the main training course for hypnotherapy in the UK, and it was awful. It was absolutely awful. I got my qualification, but I was not proud of it. It was such a bad course. And at that point, I thought, hey, wow, I know something that no one else knows in the UK. Yeah. So that was it, really. That's how it started.
Wow. What was it specifically, looking back on it with the eyes that you have now? What is it about reading Dr. Erickson's work that just jumped out at you and inspired you?
First of all, there was nothing in his work that was familiar. And I'd read, half a dozen of these kind of how to hypnotize type books. It was all new, all innovative, non-repetitious. It wasn't following the same theme and plugging the same, technique over and over again. There was no scripts. It was magic, really. These were excerpts of lectures. So he wasn't doing demonstrations, I don't think. And I don't recall him doing any demonstrations in this book. He was talking about the nature of trance and hypnosis and the interaction between people. I don't know where they came from. One obviously did many lectures, medical lectures. So it was just so new and so fresh. And I think the word innovative comes up quite a lot when I think of Erickson. It's a creative process. It's just different. It's thinking on your feet, doing something new. It's not buying into a rote-learned system of therapy. And I wasn't a therapist really at the time. I was contemplating being a therapist, but I wasn't a therapist. But it just initiated something in me that I just thought, this is magic. And I can trace my desire to follow that kind of innovative, unique way of doing things back to a time when I was a very young kid, probably about 7 or 8. In fact, I was thinking about this only this morning. When on the school sports day, they had a relay race where there's 3 people at either end and they have a baton and the first person runs, then swaps over. Well, I was in this relay race on the school sports day in front of all the parents, and I was like 6 or 7, but no one had told me how to run a relay race. So when the first guy went off, I ran after him and wrestled him to the ground because I thought that was the ground. And I did this twice because they started it again. And then they sent me off. And, of course, I was ridiculed and people laughed. And what it did, it made me feel, my goodness, I want to do something that nobody knows what I'm doing. So I cannot be ridiculed. I cannot be laughed at or judged. I want to do something so different that I've got no competitors. Does that make sense?
Right.
So when these words jumped off the page at me, Erickson, I thought, here is my kind of ammunition. I can use this. I can become like this, and I'll never have a competitor. And that was true for many, many years, of course. In the UK and Europe, Erickson trainings didn't happen. I was one of the probably, I don't know who was actually practicing. As far as I know, in terms of teaching, I was the first person to teach it. But I can't imagine many people were using Ericksonian techniques when I first started in the 70s, in the UK, that is.
Yeah.
So it was a way of actually avoiding pain, I guess, avoiding being laughed at, I suppose, which carried on throughout my life and probably still exists to a certain extent, I guess. Yeah, so I think that's like it was a survival thing. And so that's why it became so attractive and the words jumped off the page. I thought, I've got something here so special. In fact, I can actually ratify that because the very first NLP training in the UK was in 1984. And I went on the very first NLP training. I can't remember how I'd heard about it, but what I did know was that a lot of it was taken from Erickson. Well, by that time, I'd been practicing for 12 years.
Right.
And it's like, how dare they? This is my stuff. I don't want any competitors out there. This is me. It's a very selfish thing. And I did the NLP course to really check out what they were teaching about Erickson. And Robert Dilts and many other people, early trainers on that training course. And at the end of the course, it was a 9-month course, 1 month, 1 weekend a month. Robert took me at the end of the course and he said, why don't you teach Erickson? No one's doing it in the UK. And it was like a task, really. And so I thought, yeah, why not? I mean, we're talking about 1985 now, something like that. And so I just want to set up the course. And it was that point I had a real conflict for me because it's like, this is my stuff. It's all mine. I can't share it with anyone else. And there was a beautiful American woman on the course, lovely woman. She was a lot older than me, who kept hitting on me the whole time. And she said, Steve, she said, you've got to give it away. When you give it away, you'll get it back. Don't hold it back, because there was zero conflict at the time. Give it away, give it away, which is a very Buddhist thing, of course, but she wasn't Buddhist, but just give it away. And so I set up the first training, and immediately had 18 people enrolled on it. And that was the skeleton of the training courses that were developed and evolved over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know that you kind of brought up the training courses. Your personal story after that to me is very inspiring in that you really became so very successful, not just in your teaching and in your therapy work, but your business, your organization became so financially successful. But there came a point where you decided, you just couldn't do that anymore. Could you just talk a little bit about that decision and to why you decided to move? Yeah.
Okay. In order to make sense of that, we have to go back to that point where I started teaching the first time after Robert Dilts, etc., said go for it. It was purely a financial thing. I was working as a therapist. I was making a lot of money, mind you, as a therapist, because there's not that many hypnotherapists in the area I was working. So I was very, very busy. And so teaching a course and letting go and giving away, if you like, in my mind, it was giving away the skills that I knew about and I'd honed myself. It was like a sacrifice. So I thought, I want being paid for this. So it wasn't done through any kind of sense of compassion and sharing and giving and wanting to change the world. It was purely I wanted money. So I set up the course, and it was incredibly successful. It evolved very quickly. It was about 1986, I think, the first training, 1986 or 87, and it exploded. It was really incredibly successful. And we had 200 people on a course on 4 courses running simultaneously at any time. So over a year period, for example. So it was a lot of money, and of course I was on a roll in financially, but I was still practicing. And for me, because I knew all of the material inside out, I could teach it blindfolded in my sleep, and I wanted to go beyond that. And I'd been a Buddhist since I was a kid. Since again teenager, I became Buddhist, and so that became more and more a part of my work, because over the years working with clients and when you have money, you don't care about it. Does that make sense? When money's coming in from your clients or your teaching, it's not important. You don't worry about whether you'll have it or not, because it just comes. It's just there.
Right.
So the focus isn't about making money anymore, which it was originally. It's on making a difference. And so it evolved over that time that I started to really care about people much, much, much more. And that became the dominating focus of my work, was to make a difference in the lives of others. It's almost like, okay, I've got the money. Now I want to be remembered when I'm dead. So it's still selfish, right? So it's still a selfish gene. And so, but it's a lovely kind of selfishness, because the way to actually fulfill your need and to feel good about yourself is to change lives. And so I think that's a lovely form of selfishness. That it happened that way. And then what happened, the business became so big, so huge, that I suddenly stopped and thought, my goodness, what am I doing? I'm having less time to do therapy, even less time to teach, because I can't be in 4 places at once. So I had other trainers, and I'm actually I'm losing who I am in terms of being a therapist and a trainer. And I'm now just kind of businessman, and it became more and more stressful. And I think that the nail in the coffin in terms of my perception of who I was there was when the National Health Service in the UK, that they provided funding for training, they cut it back. And so a lot of our students were medical, clinical people, and they were being paid for by the government. Suddenly the money wasn't there for them. And so our attendances dropped. And all of a sudden it's like I built up this kind of, all these cards, they're going to tumble. And I thought, well, I could carry on and just, scale down everything. But do I still want to do that? And so I decided, okay, what's the most important thing here? Well, what do I feel best about in terms of who I am? And I thought it's about making a difference to the lives of others. And I don't want to go through the stress and the worry of handling a business that's struggling, which it undoubtedly would have done. So I thought, okay, I'll wind it down. I'll go off somewhere nice and meditate and just work on myself and work on new therapy techniques. And if and when it ever happens, I'll come back again at a different angle, but not with the intention of making lots and lots of money, but with the total focus on helping people have fantastic lives. And so that's what I did. I wound it down. And I remember saying to my wife, I'm going to wind the business down and we're going to give everything away, which we did. We gave house away, car and stuff like that, furniture. Neighbours are very happy with the furniture. Up in Derbyshire, up in the mountains in the UK. So, and she said, what's the worst that could happen then if we did this? What's that? Well, I'd already decided we're going to go live in Thailand, and the idea was going to be on the beach, in a little bamboo hut somewhere, because I met someone who did that. And I said, well, the worst that will happen is we'll be living in paradise. Yeah. And she said, yes. So that's what we did. When we arrived in Thailand, we weren't happy with the beach. I wasn't happy with the beach. It's an obvious choice to go and live on a desert island or something, but in fact, it's incredibly boring.
Yeah.
You're just looking at the sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Permanent hypnotic trance.
Yeah, exactly.
So we decided to live in the mountains because you've got panoramic views in the mountains. So that's what we did. And that's the way I started thinking about non-attachment.
Wow. Well, I would like to kind of segue into that. First of all, to me, that's inspiring that, for a lot of people, particularly, I'll just say it, us Americans, the material quest occupies so much of our consciousness to just say, okay, well, I'm giving it away and just moving on and focusing what's important. I mean, that's pretty remarkable and inspiring. But that goes into like you said, the Buddhist. You and I both have the kind of the Buddhist leaning, and you spent a good bit of time in Thailand studying, in the jungles and meditating and with Buddhists, and you came on this approach to therapy that you're calling non-attachment therapy. And I was wondering if just you could talk a little bit about that and the basic idea that you're operating with.
If you're cooking a meal, you have ingredients. And, of course, you can have a dozen ingredients, but you can create maybe 100 different meals out of those ingredients depending on how you mix them, how you cook them, and what you do with them. With non-attachment therapy, all I did, it's very simple, actually. All I did was I looked at what worked. That is what had a track record of being successful. And Buddhism goes back 2,600 years. And I'm not talking about Buddhism in the terms of sitting in front of a Buddha and asking for something, making a wish or whatever, or anything in that form. I'm talking about the teachings of something like Buddhism. The psychology of Buddhism, if you like. And other faiths have their own psychology. But specifically Buddhism, because I was familiar with it and I was already Buddhist. And so I thought, well, what is it about Buddhism that actually works in terms of the teachings, the psychology? What is the essence that works? Because it's obviously been successful. Good track record, 2,600 years. First of all, I thought that. Secondly, I thought, is there a way we can apply what works in Buddhism, not just to one problem or two problems or this particular problem, as we do with techniques? I have a technique for stopping smoking, technique for anxiety, relationship therapy, whatever. Is there some kind of simple principle that has consistently been successful that could be applied to all problems, right across the board, that deals with all human suffering, if you like?
Yeah.
So that was the second question I had to meditate on. And the last one was, is there some way that we can embed that into a Western way of working therapeutically? And of course, I had my experience with Erickson techniques, and I knew what worked there very successfully. And I knew about hypnosis and the principles in hypnosis, what works. And I thought, okay, here's my kind of ingredients. Now I'll sit down and do some cooking. And so over a period of maybe 8 years of meditating on this, talking to various monks and shamans, and little things that is quite important. I was talking to one particular monk, and I said, I've decided that the essence of what works in Buddhism in terms of therapy and the psychology is the whole concept of detachment. And he just burst out laughing. Mm-hmm. He says, "How wrong you are." And I'm thinking, I just spent 7.5 years thinking about this. He just fell about laughing. He says, "You're absolutely wrong." He says, "You're never going to succeed in any way if you think of it as detachment." Mm-hmm. And I just thought, why not? And he said, because think of what you're saying. Detachment, what is the prerequisite to detachment? And I suddenly realized it's attachment. You have to attach before you can detach.
Right.
He said, so you have to go beyond the normal way of thinking about reality. Don't think of detaching from something. Even if you are attached to it, don't think of detaching. You have to think of non-attachment in the first place, non-attachment. And if you can train people to not be attached right from the outset, there'll be no attachment to detach from. And that really, it's such a simple idea, just a change in perception, stepping to one side and seeing it through his eyes. And then you think, oh my goodness, of course it's non-attachment. That hadn't occurred to me until he told me that. And then that somehow just brought everything together. And there was just one other component, very small component, which was necessary that didn't hit me until I remembered something that I'd completely forgotten. And I lived in the jungle, as you said, and I used to live by a waterfall. It was very damp and not that comfortable. It sounds very romantic, but it's actually very uncomfortable. I lived near a waterfall in 3 kind of little huts, and I was sitting there meditating, looking out, and I suddenly, don't know where it came from, suddenly remembered I'd spent a week in Dublin several years before with an Irish healer. Mm-hmm. These are like seventh son of a seventh son.
Right.
And he showed me how he did healing. And basically what he was doing, he was overloading the conscious mind with such positive affirmations isn't necessarily the word, such positive expectation of success that the conscious mind couldn't go back to its original thinking. So it's like blocking the conscious mind with his presence and his whole attitude of expectation, and the language he was using was so unbelievably optimistic. People would say, "How can you say that? You don't know it's going to work." And you say, "Yes, it is," and it was so convincing, and it somehow rewrote the perception that not called clients, but the patients had. The perception they had of their problems was rewritten through this kind of blocking of their normal patterns of thinking. And I thought, well, if I can do that, but teach people non-attachment, so that the overwhelming process is about non-attachment, and make that fill the person's consciousness to such a point where they're unable to attach any longer to their previous problems. We've got it. We've got something here. And so that's why I worked on that. So that component came in. And then I developed a simple technique called non-attachment therapy. Although, in fact, as a therapy, it's a lot larger than that in terms of it's a technique, but it also, I've expanded it into an entire therapy session, like a 1.5 hour session, where it's a kind of almost a lifestyle learning process where it's not just giving you a technique to deal with your problem. It actually teaches you to rewrite your beliefs about who you are. And so I see non-attachment therapy as 2 things. One, a technique that can be taught fairly quickly and be used very rapidly, very successfully in just a couple of minutes. And then as a full-blown therapy session where the person goes off and their life has changed because you've rewritten their beliefs about what is possible. So there's 2 forms to that. But it evolved over time. The technique kind of came fairly quickly, 8 years. But it's after I came back started teaching again, which was around about 2003, 4, something like that. And I started seeing clients again, because I wasn't seeing clients in Thailand. I started seeing clients again, and I found myself, oh wow, I'm doing things differently. I'm a hypnotherapist. I was marketing myself as an Erickson hypnotherapist, teaching Erickson hypnotherapy. But my sessions the foundations was Erickson, but the work I was doing was non-attachment. But I didn't talk about that. I didn't tell people this is what I'm doing at that time, simply because they'd come to see Erickson hypnotherapy. But the whole approach had shifted completely. And something, just one last thing, just to put that into context. I somehow, I'm able to do great work in front of an audience. And I always work in front of audiences. It's the way I believe it's the best way to teach. You see it happen. And then it's explained, it's broken down. It's very important. I think it's a great way of learning. And someone said to me, how do you get these results in just one session? And I said, I think it's contextual. When you're traveling, and I travel a lot, when you're traveling and you're teaching, you aren't around to back up the session. You're not there for that person week after week. So I've had to compress everything that works into that one session. And when I came back to teaching after realizing that, the non-attachment as a principle can deal with all suffering rapidly and effectively in such a way that the client is absolutely amazed when they see it. And during that session, not afterwards, actually experience it at that moment. It's like, wow, what's happened? What's happened? Where's my problem? Some people even have amnesia for even why they came. Seriously. It's that experience. And I thought, okay, that's why things work quickly. It's a combination of contextual and if you like, utilization of principles that have existed for thousands of years and compounding them, putting them together in this particular way.
Wow. It's we were talking about the detachment and the attachment. It's about a year and a half ago, one of my teachers, Lama Abhay Rinpoche, who's from India, he said, we could sit and have a session. We got to sit and talk privately, and everything here's problem number one, and then he would nod and smile and he goes, it's attachment. And I said, well, here's problem number two. Oh, it's attachment. So after the third or fourth, I said, well, I know his English isn't good, but I'm going to assume that he knows exactly what I'm saying. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's it. And I think that's so true because we all get attached to our problems, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the very nature of problems is caused by attachment.
Right. And then we get in a loop because we get attached to our attachment.
Yeah, which makes it worse. It compounds itself.
Oh. Yeah. Well, I've watched several of your videos, and when you're working with clients and teaching in the past, and I've been around the Erickson game for a while, and there's several of his direct students who I consider very good friends, and I very always impressed by them. But when I watch you, Stephen, I have to be honest, particularly recently, is in the last 10 years. The level of compassion that you appear to exude toward the client, that's what always, and maybe I'm not looking for the techniques now like I might have been before, but that's what really comes across how masterfully you bring that. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of using compassion in these sessions?
Yeah. It's a difficult thing to talk about because, as you say, you can't say, here's the compassion technique.
Right.
Obviously, I mean, we're having to talk in a very vague and almost metaphorical way, I guess, to explain it. I suppose it's thinking with your heart. Everybody deserves to have the same quality of life that you have. If you can help them achieve that in some way. Again, I talk about selfishness here because it is a selfish thing. Compassion can be very selfish, but it's a delightful form of selfishness. Because if you want, the word is want, it immediately means it's attachment. If you want someone to be really successful and happy and healthy, have a great life, it's because you get something from it as well. even though you may never meet that person again. The whole idea that you made a difference, I think, is enough to be able to value who you are as an individual. And I've mentioned this several times, I think to lie on your deathbed, look back over your life and think, I could have done more. When you know you could have done and you didn't do it, would be a horrible feeling. It would be a feeling of regret. And the thing about regret is it means you can't go back and change it. That's it. That's it. And to lie on your deathbed and think, well, I didn't love enough, I didn't do this enough, and I could have done, and I had it at my fingertips, and I just didn't do it. I don't want to have that feeling. You see, Paul, that's a fear of mine, that I would look back and think I didn't make a difference, I didn't do enough. I think, so if you think of it as a selfish thing, that's great, because then when you're with people, not just in a therapeutic context, but regardless, in life, you could be at a checkout in the supermarket. If you know somehow you have the ability to say something, do something that will make a difference to that person's life, even just with a smile, even something as simple as that, then I think it's a crime not to do it, because you're going to build up, if you like, your points or whatever, in terms of who you are. I think in Buddhist, you would talk about karma, I guess. In Buddhism. I don't think of it like that, like that, but of course that's what it would be about. I'm not doing it because I want to be reborn a better person next time. I'm doing it simply because I get a lot of pleasure out of making a difference in someone's life. But I don't hang on to them. I don't think, oh, yes, it's that person, I might tick them off. That's not like that. It's not that kind of thing. It's just, when you know you can do something well, why would you not do it?
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that. So I think to develop compassion, you have to develop yourself in such a way that you know that you can do something well, regardless, in fact, of whether you're a therapist. You can say anything you do, if you can do it well, why do it less than well? You can be a compassionate lawnmower mechanic. If that's your job, mending lawnmowers, be compassionate about it, because that person is waiting to get their lawnmower back. So they shouldn't stop at just therapy. I think if you always think of everyone deserves to have a life and not suffer, that's it really, I think. And then if you have that as your perception, compassion comes effortlessly. You don't have to try and get it. There's no technique for it. It comes because of the way you perceive other people and the relationship with other people. And some people are testing you all the time. Not easy, of course, to be compassionate to someone who just cut you in on a motorway or has horned you or is shouting something out of the window at you. It's difficult to be compassionate. But I think those moments are good as well, because it tests our own integrity and how attached we are to those negative emotions that we might feel at that moment, whether we can just let them go. So it's all a learning and a lesson.
Yeah. So much of the work we do and if not the Ericksonian vein, but just, strategic, whatever label you give, it's to move clients toward resources. But I'm what I'm hearing too is just the simple act of showing that compassion and just that love, if you will, for the client is an incredible resource.
Absolutely.
To help them change. How do you, when you're working with someone, how do you, I know it sounds like, again, it's abstraction and we're trying to get it specific here, but that love for them as a human being, how do you make sure that you're centered in that before you start your intervention or work?
I don't need to be centered. It's there all the time. But I think it wasn't there. As I said, when I became a therapist, it was for the money. It happened because I sat with 9 patients, or in UK patients, clients, nine clients a day for 12 years. And that's a lot of people. And those people taught me my art, if you like. It's not so much a science, it's an art. And they taught me that. And you can't help but start to change the way you think about people when you see suffering and you see differences, you see change in people. And that becomes much more important than any kind of financial gains from it. So I think it's not a question of sitting down and saying, I'm now going to be compassionate. or centering yourself. It's actually, it evolves through intent. You just intend. I suppose that whole principle that Erickson promoted, the principle of observation and utilization. That is, you can't utilize what the client gives you unless you first can observe it. So you need to pay attention. I think if you listen with your heart, what's happening there is that you're tuning in not just to the client's story, you're tuning into their entire state, their entire emotional state, and who they are at the deepest level of their being. You're not just talking about a symptom, a strategy, something that's gone wrong along in the past. You're tuning into them as a human being and identifying the human elements within them that you recognize in yourself, and you think, I love this person. I remember I was teaching in a temple in Chiang Mai, in Thailand, a few years ago, and these were people international that came from France and other countries. A lot of people from France come to see me. And I did this course in a temple, a Buddhist temple, because it was about non-attachment therapy. So let's put it in a temple context and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I said to the group, it's about day 5, I said to the group, how many people would do what I'm going to tell you? If I said to you now, because I was giving them tasks all the time. I love to give them tasks, send them out into the world. I said, if I gave you the task now to go out on the street, and the first person you meet, regardless of who they are, what gender, how age, what they look like, that first person you're going to marry and spend the rest of your life with. How many people here would willingly say, yes, I'll do that? And of course, the context is strange because they know I'm not going to tell them to do that. But it's like, would you actually agree to do that? Would you be able to do that? Would you be able to do it for yourself? Because I know I could. And I said this to them, and nobody said yes. They all said no. I was very disappointed. They had 5 days with me, and they still. But that's the point. I think to get to that point as a therapist where the client is more important than you'd almost sacrifice yourself for their own happiness. That you cannot sit down and decide to do that. That happens as a result of you just being there with the intent of wanting to love them enough that they get better and they move beyond the reason they came. Because therapy is not just about fixing things, is it, Paul? It's about what happens after you fix things. That's why they're there. Their focus immediately is about changing something that's not working in their life. Mm-hmm. Often they haven't thought beyond that. And the way I work is to actually, I'm going to assume that the problem will be fixed because I've got no doubts about that because of the techniques, the non-attachment, because they won't be able to access it anymore. So it's really about the consequences, the positive consequences of having fixed this. What doors will now open in their future? And that's where I focus most of my love, if you like, and right. my intention. It's totally focused on that for them. And I think that's something that some therapists do, but it tends to happen at the end of a series of sessions. How are we going to move on? What happens now? Let's wean this client off me so they can go off in the world. I do it from the very moment they walk in the door. So I think that is a different way of working. And I think if people want to develop that compassion, they should think along those lines. Think about how I want this person to be happier than me, more successful than me. And that's a pretty rare thing, I think, for anyone to think of another person. But if you go into therapy with that attitude, then you can't hide that. The client picks it up. They pick it up. And that itself becomes this huge hypnotic suggestion, number one, but a huge gift that they've probably never received ever before from any other living person.
Yeah.
And because you're teaching based on non-attachment, you haven't got that kind of transference thing. They don't hang on to you and keep wanting to come back because you give them the skills in the non-attachment therapy to move on and do it for themselves. That's another thing. You don't hide the skills. You don't hold them back. No, you mustn't learn what I do. I'm not going to teach you how I do this. You actually teach them to do it for themselves. It's a strange job because you don't want to see your customers again.
Yes, yeah.
So people say to me, how do you make money? How am I going to make, if I teach students who are new to this, how am I going to make an income? I said, because you will be who you are. You'll be you.
Mm.
And because you'll make this huge difference, you won't have to worry about money. First of all, it won't be important to you anyway. But secondly, we won't realize that till later. But secondly, people will hear about you, and you'll find people coming to you because of who you are, not because, you're marketing or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Man, that's pretty profound. And what advice would you have to therapists who come to you and say, I know all the techniques, I know all the theories, I know all the things I need to do, but I just can't seem to trust myself to get in and have that alive spontaneity, as you were saying, with a client. Do you have advice for them on how to just be able to let go, which is, I guess, an attachment to an outcome, but to be able to let go and just allow what happens happen?
Yeah, it's an attachment to their own fear of failing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you've got no fear of failing, then you just open your mouth, and whatever comes out, comes out. But if you're thinking, am I doing the right thing? You're going to hesitate. You're not going to be the best. You're not going to give the best of yourself. You'll be working at far less than 100%. My advice would be to take risks. I don't mean do something risky, but take risks with your own sense of self and let go of wanting to be seen to be good or perfect,
mm-hmm.
And just open your mouth. The point is, if you're a therapist and you're people who are trained in therapy and they're working as a therapist and they have those kind of thoughts, and they want to move, or they just want to move beyond the technique, and
mm-hmm.
they already know it. They know the techniques, so they don't have to think, is this the right thing or the wrong thing? Their unconscious mind knows what's right. And I would prescribe, maybe something Erickson, of course, would do, is maybe a few weeks of just storytelling. That every client that comes in, don't use any techniques. Just listen with the heart, and then without even thinking about how you're going to respond, open your mouth and just tell a story, whatever comes out. And it'll often be a story that is new to you. You will not have heard this story before. And as you say it, you won't even know where it's going. And I think if a therapist does that, and takes a couple of weeks to do that, every single client gets that.
Mm-hmm.
Magic will happen. Clients will transform. You'll get to the root of problems. Things will change. Nobody will know what the problem was or the root of the problem was, but clients will change. It's like two unconscious minds in dialogue. You're responding from the heart to the emotional needs of someone at an unconscious level rather than what the script was they gave you, for example, because you'll pick up stuff beyond the script. Every client has their own script. You'll pick it up.
Yes.
And it'll be two unconscious minds communing together, and there'll be dramatic changes, not only in the client but in the therapist, because the therapist will realize they can trust themselves and they don't have to think. They can let go of the attachment to success, the attachment to fear of failure. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Well, now that you have had these life experiences and just the joys of getting older and wiser, now that you're have kind of come out of the jungle, so to speak, and are teaching again, what have you found that all of that has helped you do better in your teaching and your therapy and all those kind of activities?
Okay. Personally, what can I do better personally is to let go of any expectations of something being real. That is, before I became a therapist, like anybody else, and like most people in the world, I guess, you think that black is black, white is white, things are concrete, you bump into a wall, it hurts. Well, those things still happen, of course. But in terms of whether I know the reality I'm navigating is as real as it appears, is as certain as it appears, I've let go of all of that. So my sense personally, the benefit to me personally is that it's shaken up my whole perception of reality and my part in that process. of existing in the world. And it's a form of non-attachment, of course, because if you cease to be attached to your reality, it means you're not a victim of the reality. You're not a victim of things that happen in that reality, because you know it's just perception. It's not real. And if we look at it in terms of physics, we know this is true. It's very simple, simply because of the time it takes for an event out there in the world to reach our brain and then to go into our brain and be experienced as some kind of phenomena, means that when we experience it in our heads, it's already happened. It's in the past, simply because it's the time it takes. And we know this, a sound wave and a light waves take different time to reach our senses, which is why you can see somebody maybe bang a gate, shut a gate down the street, and you see it. You don't hear it until the second afterwards. And so how can that be the present moment if you can if there's a delay between one and another phenomenon? So that's a kind of very simple way of putting it. But when you have that as your perception of everything that happens in the world, it frees you from becoming a victim of events and things out there. And I think it allows you to also be very creative and do things you probably wouldn't normally do, because you feel it's my reality. I can create it in whatever way I want.
Yeah.
Within limitations, of course. You can't jump out of windows.
Yeah.
And I think that's the personal benefit for me.
Yeah. Well, since you're now doing more trainings, I know that you're spending more time in London as of late, Paris as well. Hopefully down the road, maybe some United States dates, Australia, possibly.
Yeah, Australia. I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Australian conference, the conference 2 years ago, and that was great. I was very ill actually at the time, but nobody knew it. But the conference was fabulous. The people were fabulous. So that's what I mean, not me. The people were amazing. They were so warm. And I did plan to teach there, but I cancelled that because there was a lot of opposition from other organizations, training organizations, that was moving in on the territory. And that was actually quite surprising and very sad. But anyway, the courses I planned there, I cancelled. All the students, every single one, came to see me in Thailand.
Wonderful.
Which was fabulous. It's lovely to see that commitment, to what it is. The US, I've never been to the States. And I admit I'm a little scared. It's a territory that I'm unfamiliar with. I think as you know, I've got this resistance to being a businessman because of my history. I don't want to go back into that route. And it's like suddenly here we have, this huge, huge country, and I've got to promote a business there? Come on. That's like scary. So it's like, if someone wants to invite me to teach there for an organization, I would be there like a shot. I would definitely do that. I'm very happy to do that. But to actually promote something myself there, I tried to do it about 2 years ago. I set up some courses, but I just couldn't back it up with the marketing experience because I'm not a businessman. So I pulled out of that, unfortunately. Although, again, the two guys who booked on one of the courses came over to England and also to Thailand. So those that are interested do actually follow me, but that's not fair. I have to go present myself and be closer to people who would benefit. But it's one of those things. I'd love to come, but someone has to sponsor me. An organization who has a mailing list has to promote me, and then I'd love to do it.
That sounds great. And of course, since you are offering courses in Thailand, also in therapy and Ericksonian hypnosis and non-attachment therapy. So if someone's interested, they can, like you say, come see you.
They come see me in Thailand. All the London courses, the main London courses in August. It's 3 weeks in August at the University of London. And so, again, people, and it's accommodation at the universities. It's not expensive for people to stay at the university in central London. So it could be a touristy thing as well, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I just want to thank you so much for your time because I know how busy you are. And I just want to publicly tell you, Stephen, you have been an enormous inspiration for me over the last few years watching your videos, and we've corresponded, and we said this before we started recording, but you even publicly endorsed my book Potential Not Pathology about Erickson's work, and you just made my day when you did that. I tell you, it really meant a lot to me, and I think just the little bit that we've talked about today is inspiring to me, and I'm sure it'll be to others. So I want to honor your time and to thank you so much for talking to me today.
Well, I'm very grateful for you giving me a platform where other people can somehow benefit from this discussion we've had, because that's what it's all about, Paul, isn't it? It's about other people. People will never meet, people will never know, somehow having happier lives through somehow something we're doing here. So thank you for the platform that we could share today. It's very important for me that you invited me to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Potential Not Pathology with Dr. Paula J. Leslie. If you enjoyed the show, check out our website at potentialnotpathology.com, where you will find programs and articles showcasing unique and creative therapeutic applications.